Well, I'm Dr. Harry Delaney. I'm a surgeon. I lived in the Harlem area as a child between the 1940s and well into the 1970s period, and had a childhood in which I enjoyed playing basketball and going to the clubs and going to the Savoy Ballroom and all the other things that characterized the area at that time. It was a vibrant community and my family was quite active. My father was a judge and he had one brother living on and working on 125th Street as a lawyer, another brother with a dental office on 134th Street in Lenox Avenue. He was in practice of dentistry with his sister, Bessie, who was well known for her later book, Having Our Say. Another brother of my father, an Uncle Sam, had a undertaker office, a funeral home on Lenox Avenue and 7th Avenue and 132nd or 133rd Street. So I spent a lot of time in that area and at the Rivington houses where a lot of my friends were. We enjoyed playing basketball, as I mentioned before, in the afternoon. That's what we did, and we'd go dancing as often as we could when there was a party or something to celebrate. The music was outstanding, and the clubs, the Red Rooster, the original Red Rooster was there, and Jock's Club, and of course I mentioned the Savoy Ballroom. I think my wife-to-be was a date I had at the Savoy Ballroom. It was quite exciting because the music was so good and everyone enjoyed the camaraderie and the spirit of Harlem at that time. Jazz was so much a part of our lives at that time. I remember when I was applying to college and I didn't want to leave New York. Things were so great and exciting. Charlie Parker was in the city of New York, and Dizzy Gillespie. So many artists were coming into New York at that time, and it was relatively easy to hear the great jazz, which we listen to today. I mentioned basketball. That's what we did in the afternoons. That was just standard in the afternoon to go and play some ball. I think that contributed to the fact that so many black young people are good at basketball. It's something they start doing when they're quite young. And that was something I did, but I wasn't really tall enough to be anything other than just another one of the kids in the neighborhood to play. We played basketball in the oval around City College. City College was right in the area, and had an opportunity to see the students and to see the faculty there. I was an altar boy too in St. Luke's Church on 141st Street. I was in the choir, and then when my voice changed, I became an altar boy in the Episcopal Church, and I remember it so very well. It was a wonderful time. I remember St. Martin's Church too. The church was very much a part of the community, and everybody, of course, did something in the church, whatever church they were going to. That's an integral part of that community. Well, I went to high school at the Bronx High School of Science, so that orientation towards science and the plan for a medical career was something I had from the time I was quite young. I always wanted to be a doctor and a surgeon, and that's what I ultimately managed to do. I went from Science High School to to college at Columbia, which was nearby. As I said, I didn't really want to leave the community. It was such an important thing to me, and we enjoyed it. We lived in a brownstone on 144th Street and then moved to a brownstone on 145th Street. Dad had to live in the city. He was a judge. So I was there in the city enjoying the yard. In fact, the backyard of the brownstone on 144th Street was cement, so we could play basketball back there. That's one of the contributing, but we could actually play in the backyard, so that was part of the basketball scene at that time. Anyway, I went from Bronx High School of Science to Columbia College, and then again to stay in the community, I went to College of Physicians and Surgeons, which is the medical school for Columbia, and that was up on 167th Street. So I was right in the neighborhood for my college and even for medical school. It was a great education. Columbia was a wonderful, wonderful experience. The college was a very, very stimulating intellectual experience for me. I began to have some doubts about going into medicine. It was so exciting to be in a school like that, but it was right there in the community. It was part of my background, and from there, after training in medicine, I ultimately went up into the Bronx to train in surgery at the Montefiore Hospital, and I inevitably had a career in the Bronx and in medicine, in surgery. I subsequently had some interesting experiences in the city with, when Koch was mayor, I was on an advisory committee for the mayor, and later did some advisory work for the Center for Disease Control on injury prevention, and later did work for the University of the West Indies as a surveyor and as a external examiner. I also had the opportunity later on to work for the state as a surveyor for some of the offshore medical schools. So that was for the Governor Patterson, who was a friend. In any event, I'm very fond of Harlem. I've seen it change now as it is more popular for people to live there. It is less of a black community. At that time, it was a black community. White people didn't want to live in Harlem, and I don't know about the opposite, but downtown was much too expensive for people to live there. But it was a vibrant and interesting kind of a community. It was where we enjoyed the entertainment and then enjoyed those elements that are part and parcel of the community. The Old Teresa Hotel, Savoy Ballroom, the things that I think are really quite fond in my memory, at least. And I've shared some of that experience with my wife, who we were dating, my wife and I were dating back in the days when Harlem was quite exciting. And she was from Long Island, and it was an experience for her to see Harlem because her experience as a young person was quite different from mine. Mine was a fond memory. The main influence was my father, Hubert Delany, who was a wonderful role model, a civil rights leader, and one of the first judges in the city of New York. Probably a very, very major influence on me. As with most people, of course, my mother was very, very, very helpful for me, and going on to medical school and my subsequent training, there was a Dr. Hurwitz who was the chairman of surgery at Montefiore Hospital. And it's of interest that at a fundraiser for the community. My father met Dr. Hurwitz, and Dr. Hurwitz urged that I come up to the Bronx to train at Montefiore Hospital. So that was a very important contributing factor, and Dr. Hurwitz took a special interest in me as a surgeon. I think he, in addition to wanting to train Hubert Delany's son, he also wanted to help the minority community. So Dr. Hurwitz was one of my first mentors, and subsequently I've had several mentors that were wonderful people. There was a Dr. Stanley Levinson up at Albert Einstein, and I worked in his laboratory and worked with him and subsequently became a professor at Albert Einstein. And Dr. Levinson was a very, very important person, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And in fact, just recently was saying to my wife how some people just impact on you because they teach you how to write and publish and to do research and things of that sort that are important if you're in the world of medicine and healthcare, and if you're in what we call an academic or teaching role. I've had a very interesting experience traveling for the University of West Indies as an external examiner to see other medical schools than the medical schools here in New York. And in medical school, I became a good friend to Dr. Kenneth Ford, who's a surgeon and a buddy of mine. I was his best man, and my wife and his wife were very dear friends until her recent demise. We loved Ken, and he was one of the first blacks to go to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And as I recollect, the two of us were two of the only ones in the entire medical school, where now today 20-30% of the students are minority students. So life's changed a bit, and I've been able to see the community change, not only in the real estate, but in the professional people who are involved. I was close to Bessie and Sadie Delaney because I was the only, when they lost their older brother who practiced in Raleigh, I was the next physician in the family, the only physician in the family at that time. And they only wanted to deal with a member of the family. They were very family oriented, and they were here in Mount Vernon. And we settled in Mount Vernon, bought a home there, and of course they frequently called on me, and that was one of the ways in which I became involved with the sisters, and they were quite interesting. I think the book that Amy Hill Harth did with them reflected exactly the way they were. If you went into their house, it was like you were stepping back 50 years. The house was just the way it was 50 years ago. There was no television there, and when the play was done, based on the book, the play was based on the visit to their living room where you listened to Sadie and Bessie. And they were kind of stuck in time. If you read the book, their attitudes and their view was the view that people had 50 years ago. I think it was an extraordinarily unique thing to visit with Sadie and Bessie, because most of us move along. As I said, it's hard to accept change, but they were really not moving ahead. Their view, their attitude about the neighborhood, their attitude about people, their attitudes were the attitudes from 50 years ago. Life is different. Harlem Hospital is different. The cost of an apartment in Harlem is different. The cost of a brownstone. I remember my parents paying $20,000 to buy a brownstone, and I remember the comments about how expensive that brownstone was at $20,000. And about $20,000 won't buy you a car in many circumstances. So life changes, and it is again the positive side of being married. You sometimes get advice from someone who's a little younger than you are. So just stay current, you know.